At 3:20 p.m. local time, the Caribbean looked almost too perfect to question. Glassy water, sharp visibility, and the kind of calm conditions sailors usually read as reassuring. But a quiet sea does not always mean a quiet situation, especially when a U.S. carrier strike group is passing through international waters. At the heart of that formation was USS Gerald R. Ford. Not a destroyer, not a cruiser, a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, one of the most sophisticated vessels ever deployed at sea. Nearly 100,000 tons of steel, reactors working below the waterline, aircraft ready overhead, and a security screen spread far beyond what the eye could see. On the bridge, the watch team was not expecting anything dramatic. They were handling what trained professionals handle every day, tracking ordinary contacts, commercial traffic, fishing boats, the usual clutter of maritime movement. Then one contact changed its pattern. A Venezuelan naval vessel shifted course. Not a gentle drift, not a weather-related correction. A clear turn toward the carrier strike group. At first, nobody overreacted. No alarms, no theatrics, just verification. The contact had changed heading, and its speed was rising. That was the point when an ordinary watch became something more serious. USS Gerald R. Ford did not turn away. It did not have to. Carriers do not respond the way smaller ships do. They do not simply adapt to the environment, they define it. Inside the Combat Information Center, the situation was already understood in full detail. Range, bearing, speed, course. The Venezuelan vessel was not wandering. It was not disoriented. It was moving in with intent. And at sea, intent changes everything. The gap between the ships began to shrink. Slowly at first, then more noticeably, closest point of approach estimates became tighter. Even then, no radio message came from the approaching vessel. No bridge-to-bridge call, no attempt to explain its intentions. Only silence. And that silence carried weight. On a U.S. Navy ship, when another military vessel closes distance without communication, that is not treated as a simple unknown. It is treated as a choice. Ford's escorts responded with subtle precision. Destroyers adjusted their positions by fractions of a mile, nothing obvious to a casual observer, but instantly clear on radar. The layered screen around the carrier tightened quietly and professionally. From the outside, it may have looked like very little was happening. Inside the formation, everything was in motion. USS Gerald R. Ford is not designed to be challenged up close. It is designed to handle situations long before they fully develop. Its sensors do not wait for a visual sighting, and they do not rely on the human eye alone. They read the environment in multiple layers: surface activity, subsurface movement, airspace, and electromagnetic signals. By the time the Venezuelan vessel entered visual range, it had already been tracked, identified, analyzed, and logged. Every radar signal, every increase in speed, every course adjustment. This was not yet a direct confrontation, but it was no longer neutral. The officer of the deck kept his tone steady, and the ship held its course. That kind of composure matters aboard U.S. Navy ships. Posture sends its own message. No abrupt reactions, no visible emotion. Sometimes presence alone says more than words. The Venezuelan vessel continued closing in, and that is when the imbalance became impossible to ignore. It was not approaching a single ship. It was approaching a full carrier strike group, a formation built for major operations, not symbolic pressure. Around Ford were guided missile destroyers whose Aegis systems were already following the contact. Above, aircraft already in the air on routine patrol could be redirected within minutes. No weapons were visibly aimed, no obvious fire control lock was on display. The U.S. Navy does not rush escalation, but it prepares with complete seriousness. From the Venezuelan bridge, Ford probably looked massive, unmistakable, like a city moving across the sea. What they could not see was the invisible perimeter around it, stretching for dozens of miles, where critical decisions were already being made. That was the real miscalculation, not the turn itself, not even the approach. The mistake was treating this like a simple ship-to-ship encounter. It was not. It was one vessel moving toward the most heavily protected maritime asset in the world, escorted, connected, and fully aware of everything unfolding around it. And USS Gerald R. Ford still had not answered that pressure in public. That silence was not uncertainty. It was control. That was control. And in naval operations, control comes first. What follows depends on what the other side does next. From the outside, almost nothing seemed to change. Ford stayed on course. Speed remained steady. No sharp maneuver, no dramatic display, nothing that looked designed for spectators. To someone without experience, it might have looked like patience, maybe even detachment. Inside the ship, it was neither. Far below the flight deck, past layers of steel and narrow passageways, the Combat Information Center was already operating at full focus. Consoles lit the room, streams of data refreshed by the second. Radar returns merged with satellite inputs. Air tracks hovered over surface contacts. Every movement was being measured, marked, and recorded in real time. The Venezuelan vessel was no longer just another symbol on a screen. It had become a full behavioral picture. Its speed adjustments were mapped. Its heading changes were compared. Its emission patterns were studied. Passive sensors listened carefully while active systems stayed quiet. Ford did not need to prove it was watching. It preferred to know with certainty. This is how the U.S. Navy handles rising tension, by understanding the situation faster than the other side expects. The strike group's awareness extended well beyond the carrier itself. Aegis destroyers were feeding long-range radar data into a shared operating picture. Airborne early warning aircraft refined the track from above, watching not only where the ship was, but how it behaved in the seconds between each course change. And every few moments, the closest point of approach numbers became tighter. Still no radio call. That mattered. Rules of engagement are not designed to delay action. They exist to keep action precise. And at sea, one of the clearest signs of intent is silence when communication is expected. Ford's command team did not make its posture more visible. It made it more serious. Watch conditions shifted. Flight activity was adjusted. Aircraft already in the air were given broader patrol patterns and better approach angles. Aircraft on deck were secured and positioned for faster response. Fuel, timing, deck flow, readiness. Everything moved to a higher level without a public signal. This was not a dramatic reaction. It was a change in posture. And aboard a carrier, escalation happens in layers. Awareness first, control second, and only after that, if required, consequences. The Venezuelan vessel crossed another line. It was now close enough that doubt began to disappear. Visual confirmation matched the radar picture. Hull number identified. Mounts observed. Crew activity on deck noted. Still no hail. That silence was logged again. Inside CIC, the question had changed. It was no longer, what are they doing? It had become, why are they still doing it? Because by then, there was no room left for confusion. Any naval officer understands distance. Any bridge team understands carrier operations. Closing on a U.S. carrier without coordination is not something professionals mistake by accident. It is a signal. Ford did not answer that signal with words, it answered with placement. Destroyers adjusted station by fractions of a mile, building overlapping defensive coverage. Nothing flashy, nothing obvious from a distance, just geometry, angles, reach, and control. The strike group tightened without seeming to shift at all. That is the part most people never see. Carriers do not rely on spectacle, they rely on certainty. By now, every major system aboard Ford was aligned around one reality. If this moved any further, the result was already understood. The issue was no longer whether the carrier strike group had the capability. The issue was whether using it would become necessary. And necessity would be defined by the next move from the approaching ship. Then the Venezuelan vessel eased off slightly, just a small drop in speed, a brief hesitation. Then a subtle adjustment in course. Not exactly a withdrawal, but no longer a firm push forward either. Inside Ford, there was no sense of relief, only verification. Analysts reran projections. Course adjustments were measured against known behavior patterns. The change was slight, but unmistakable. The pressure was working. No warnings had been issued, no statements broadcast, no visible signals made. Ford had communicated entirely through presence and precision. That is the quiet reality of modern naval power. There is no need to raise your voice when the message is already understood. USS Gerald R. Ford had not launched anything, had not made an announcement, had not even acknowledged the approach over open channels. And yet the situation was already shifting, because somewhere on that Venezuelan bridge, someone had realized what they were actually facing. Not just a ship, not even just a group of ships, a fully integrated system designed to stay calm and respond with clarity if needed. And now that system was fully engaged. There were no flashing signals or verbal warnings. Ford does not broadcast escalation. It allows others to recognize it on their own. Above the carrier, the air picture began to evolve. Routine patrols widened their coverage. F/A, 18 Super Hornets adjusted spacing and altitude, forming overlapping zones that stretched far beyond what could be seen from the surface. From a distance, the aircraft might have appeared routine, almost casual. They were anything but. Each jet was part of a connected layer. Sensors feeding into sensors, information moving across the strike group in real time, every movement aligned with the rest. The air wing was not there to impress. It was there to signal awareness. From the Venezuelan deck, the sound alone would have carried the message. The steady presence of naval aviation overhead. Not a single aircraft, several. Not drifting, not improvising. Moving with discipline in patterns that any Navy would recognize immediately. You are not operating alone in this space. At sea, strength is rarely about what is aimed directly at you. It is about the environment that forms around you. The escorts adjusted again. Destroyers held positions that placed the approaching vessel within overlapping coverage zones. No visible targeting, no dramatic displays. Just angles, reach, and control. This was the point where the imbalance became clear. The Venezuelan ship did not make a sudden break. It did not turn sharply away. But its earlier confidence began to fade through small decisions. Minor heading changes, uneven speed, a hesitation that had not been present before. Inside forward, that hesitation was recognized instantly. Every naval crew understands this early on. Direct pressure is easy to spot. Uncertainty is even more revealing. The carrier continued forward, steady and predictable. That was intentional. Sudden moves can create confusion. Calm removes it. On the flight deck, operations continued without disruption. Sailors moved with routine precision. Signals were given. Equipment shifted into place. Nothing rushed, nothing exaggerated. That consistency added its own kind of pressure. When a ship continues normal operations while being tested, the message is clear. You are not shaping this situation. Above, an E-2 Hawkeye maintained its orbit, scanning vast stretches of ocean and sky. Data flowed quietly into the network. The Venezuelan vessel was now just one element within a much larger operational picture. And that picture was not in its favor. Still, the U.S. Navy said nothing. In this moment, silence was not hesitation. It was assurance. Then came another adjustment from the Venezuelan ship, more noticeable this time. Speed decreased, course shifted just enough to increase separation. Still present, still nearby, but no longer pressing forward. That was the turning point. Not because it had been forced, but because the situation had become clear. This was not a one-on-one encounter. It was not even a true face-off. It was a test of distance against a force that does not depend on distance to maintain control. Every moment the Venezuelan vessel stayed nearby, it was being observed and recorded. Sensors captured every detail. Movements were time-stamped. Behavior was analyzed. This was not just a tactical situation, it was real-time data collection. And data carries more weight than display. There was no announcement aboard Ford when the vessel began to move away. No visible reaction. No shift in routine. Because this was not about marking a win, it was about restoring balance. The display of power achieved exactly what it was supposed to achieve, without a shot, without raised voices, and without stepping over the line. The message came across in the only language that truly matters at sea, presence supported by certainty. As the gap slowly widened, the carrier strike group remained exactly what it had been from the start, steady, disciplined, and fully in command. Somewhere between the roar of aircraft overhead and the realization of what was surrounding them, Venezuela's challenge gave way to compliance. USS Gerald R. Ford did not pursue. It did not issue warnings. It did not make any visible show of reaction. It simply held its place. And in modern naval operations, that can be the most powerful move of all. The turnaway was not dramatic. No sudden maneuver, no rushed withdrawal that could later be turned into a dramatic clip. The Venezuelan vessel adjusted little by little. Speed eased down in small steps. Its bow no longer pointed directly at the carrier group. It angled away just enough. But for professionals reading the picture, the meaning was clear. This was no longer confidence. This was recovery. Inside Ford, nobody needed slogans. Naval crews think in data, not headlines. Range increasing, CPA widening, relative motion stabilizing. Every indicator pointed to the same conclusion. The pressure had reached its limit. The challenge phase was finished. On the Venezuelan bridge, that realization likely came in stages. First, the aircraft overhead. Too many, too steady, too coordinated to ignore. Then the escorts, never acting recklessly, never drifting out of place, always exactly where they needed to be. And finally, the silence from the carrier itself. No threats, no warnings, no visible response. That silence said everything. Warships are trained to read conduct, not speeches. And Ford's conduct was unmistakable. The situation was already under control. There was no reason for the carrier to push things further because doing so would not improve its position. It would only turn certainty into consequence. The Venezuelan vessel slowed again. This time, even without instruments, the change would likely have been obvious. The wake shortened, power dropped, activity on deck shifted, crew members moved back from exposed positions. Their behavior became cautious rather than assertive. Inside Ford's Combat Information Center, analysts matched the timeline against familiar patterns. The approach looked like earlier episodes of posturing. The withdrawal suggested something more important: recognition. This is how most encounters actually end. Not through force, but through understanding. Understanding that this was never a test of nerve, it was a test of awareness. And that awareness arrived late. USS Gerald R. Ford is not imposing simply because of its size. It is imposing because of its certainty. Certain that every likely outcome has already been considered. Certain that restraint is a decision, not a limitation. For the Venezuelan command team, the calculation had changed. Every additional minute near the carrier meant more exposure, more observation, more chances for a mistake that could set off a chain no one wanted. This is the part many civilians do not always see. Pulling back is not weakness when the alternative is losing control or becoming irrelevant. The Venezuelan vessel kept its distance now, still visible on radar, still technically nearby, but no longer pressing forward, no longer testing boundaries. What had started as a challenge had faded into simple coexistence. Aboard Ford, operations continued as if nothing unusual had happened. The rhythm on the flight deck never broke. Communications remained internal. No statement was drafted, no declaration was made, because from the U.S. Navy's point of view, nothing extraordinary had taken place. That is exactly how deterrence is meant to work. Not with noise, not with headlines, but with one side quietly realizing that the situation they thought they were shaping was never really in their control. The mistake was not closing in on the carrier. Naval vessels move near one another all the time. The real mistake was believing that getting closer creates leverage. It does not. Against a carrier strike group, closing distance reduces your options. It shortens decision time. It removes uncertainty. What begins as signaling quickly becomes exposure. And once that becomes clear, only one sensible choice remains. Open the distance again. That is exactly what the Venezuelan ship did. No apology, no explanation, just distance. Ford did not follow. It had no reason to. Following suggests doubt. The carrier had none. The message had already been sent, understood, and acknowledged without a single word over open radio. That was the real end of the encounter. Not because anyone launched anything, but because one side finally understood what the other had recognized from the start. You do not challenge a system by moving toward its center. And you do not mistake silence from the U.S. Navy for hesitation. Sometimes silence is simply the sound of a decision not to take things any further. By the time the distance opened again, the Caribbean looked exactly as it had before. Calm, blue, and deceptively peaceful. Ford never altered course, never changed speed, never broke formation. The strike group continued through international waters as though the encounter had never interrupted its day. From an operational standpoint, that was true. From the Navy's perspective, there was no crisis to resolve. There was only behavior to document and a lesson that had already been delivered. Every maneuver, every hesitation, every delayed course correction from the Venezuelan vessel was logged, time-stamped, and archived. Not for public attention, but for pattern analysis. That is how modern naval power works. Deterrence does not end when ships move apart. It continues in databases, briefings, and future planning. Long after the Venezuelan vessel turned away, the encounter continued inside intelligence channels, shaping how similar moments may be handled the next time. Because there is always a next time. Aboard Ford, there was no celebration. Sailors do not celebrate restraint, they respect it. The flight deck returned fully to routine. Watches rotated. Logs were completed. The ship remained what it had been from the beginning. A moving command center projecting stability, not aggression. And that stability is the point. The objective is not to embarrass anyone, not to provoke. It is to preserve freedom of movement and prevent bad decisions. Ford did not need to force the Venezuelan vessel away. It only needed to make clear that pushing things further would be unnecessary and unwise. And that message got through. The broader signal was not directed only at Venezuela. It was meant for everyone paying close attention. Partners, rivals, analysts, and anyone who studies how power is actually applied at sea. The message was simple. You do not force the U.S. Navy to respond. You force yourself to decide whether you truly want that response. The encounter reinforced a reality that has defined naval operations for decades. Restraint backed by overwhelming capability is not weakness. It is control. Ford did not become more aggressive because it did not need to. It did not issue warnings because the warning had already been understood. And that unspoken warning can carry more weight than almost any public statement ever could. In the days that followed, there were no dramatic announcements, no loud condemnations, no victory lap. That silence was deliberate. Escalation feeds narratives. Silence denies them. The strike group moved on, but the lesson remained. The mistake was not that Venezuela approached. Naval forces interact. They test limits. They signal intent. That part is not unusual. The mistake was misjudging what kind of boundary this was. A carrier strike group is not a single platform. It is a layered system built to manage pressure at every stage, from awareness to deterrence to decisive action if required. Pressing too close does not create leverage. It narrows your own room to maneuver. That was the lesson delivered that day. No missiles, no flares, no warnings broadcast over open channels. Just a controlled display of presence so complete that nothing more had to be said. As Gerald R. Ford moved toward the horizon, nothing burned, nothing sank, and nothing erupted into a spectacle online. And that is exactly why the moment mattered. Because the most effective displays of power are often the ones that end quietly, leaving everyone involved with fewer illusions than they had at the start. So here is the question this encounter leaves behind. Should the United States answer these kinds of challenges more forcefully at sea, or is measured restraint backed by undeniable capability the smarter path? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read them all. And if you want more real-world naval encounters explained with clarity, precision, and context, subscribe and stay with us. Out here, it is not about who makes the most noise. It is about who never has to.